As you know, on Sunday night or Monday morning of every week, we post a new expository semiotics explaining why we would choose which lectionary readings. But in these readings, our dream is, and our desire is, to help you read the signs and fondle the details and spot the seminal metaphors, the condensed signs and the stories that are key for preaching to a digital culture. So strap on your seatbelt and join us as we prospect our passages for today. Welcome to the 7th Sunday of Easter, vlog number 61, the 16th of May, 2021. I'm just going to list the lectionary passages for today because I really want to focus on one in particular, and I want to have enough time to do it, and I don't want to keep you too long. The passages, Acts 1, 15 to 17, and then verses 21 to 26. The famous passage that many of us memorized as a child in the King James, of course, Psalm 1. Blessed is the man. 1 John 5, 9 to 13. And then the passage that I want to really focus on is John 17, 6 to 19. Now this is the real Lord's Prayer. This is not the prayer that Jesus gave his disciples, which we call the Lord's Prayer, but it really should be called the disciples' prayer. This is the real Lord's Prayer. This is Jesus praying to his Father, and praying about what he's really counting on, hoping for, dreaming of as these events are about ready to come to pass, that he knows will change the world and change his disciples. And the one kind of the pinnacle of this prayer, as he gives a new command I give to you, love as I have loved you, and he gives this new command, and then prays to the Father that that God would keep his disciples in the world, that God wouldn't let his disciples become of the world, but he wouldn't let them get out of it either. So we have here, I call it the holy triangulation of Christ and culture. In the culture, not of the culture, but not out of the culture or out of it either. This is the essence here of Christ and culture. Now, H. Richard Niebuhr, over 50 years ago, wrote a book called Christ and Culture, and proposed a typology of 5 interactions of the church with culture, 5 possibilities. He stopped it at the Christ transforms culture. But this is not where Jesus is in this passage, and he should have added a 6th. And the 6th is Christ in, not of, but not out of the culture either. Christ in the culture, not of the culture, but Christ in the culture, not out of it, but not out of it either. So the church is supposed to be in the world, not of the world, but not out of it either. This is the doctrine of the incarnation, the way in which Jesus came into the world. He came in the world. He was not of the world, but he was not out of it either. The doctrine of the incarnation is, as we come out of COVID, as we emerge from this COVIDian era, and greet a culture in shell shock, a culture where people are suffering from PTSD. This is the doctrine that we need right now to attend to listen to make sure we have right. And so I want to spend time today with you on this doctrine of the incarnation and what Jesus means in this real Jesus prayer that we are to be, the church is supposed to be in the world, not of the world, but not out of it either. In Eastern Orthodoxy, the doctrine of the Incarnation is the centerpiece doctrine. It's the starting point, it's the centering point, and in some ways it's the ending point. In the Western Church, soteriology, the doctrine of salvation, is the centerpiece doctrine. But I think the Eastern Orthodox are more right here, that the Eastern Church gets the Incarnation at its very heart and takes it to heart, and we need to do the same. I have a quote here from a British comedian, a theater critic, and a very wise kind of lay philosopher, if you will. His name was Jonathan Miller. He died a couple of years ago. But these are his exact words. Although I am not a Christian, the idea of a God that incarnated itself into its own creation in order to suffer the experience of being its own creation is a fantastically productive metaphor. Well, it's more than a fantastically productive metaphor. But here, even somebody outside it can't get away from what a mesmerizing thought that a God that created the universe would incarnate itself, as he puts it, into that universe. Now, let me begin by saying that you cannot separate creation and incarnation. That incarnation and creation are both expressions of God's self-giving love. The incarnation of Christ is not plan B, I don't believe. Now, you're going to get a little theology this morning, and your people should get some theology sometimes. So don't be ashamed of this. The incarnation is part of the original design from the beginning in the very act of creation. It's a God who wants to share the divine life with creation. And so that sharing of the divine life leads to creation itself. The first incarnation of God in the world is creation. As God creates out of what there exists, which is God. And so there's this creation, and God exists in relationship. So we have relationship at the very basis of all of life. If you could talk, if one word for the future, relationship. One word, relationship. One word, just relationship. And this first incarnation of God in the world zings all of creation with the presence of God. There's the doctrine of the omnipresence of God. We believe somehow more in the omnipresence of evil than the omnipresence of God. No. God is omnipresent. God is present everywhere. And part of the challenge of being a better disciple is to seeing and reading the signs of God's presence in the second incarnation of what God is up to already in the world. Before the incarnation of Bethlehem 2,000 years ago, when the divine became definitive human, there was the incarnation of creation itself. Some call it the Big Bang, some call it the Big Bloom, some call it the beginning of the great chain of being, whatever you want to call it. It's when spirit became matter. Creation, wrote St. Thomas Aquinas, is the primary and most perfect revelation of the divine. If we do not understand creation correctly, we cannot hope to understand God correctly. Theologians like Aquinas, Duns Scotus, Bonaventure, have argued that the whole of creation was requisite preparation for the divine incarnation in Jesus. The only real fall of humanity, Eastern theologian Alexander Schmemann, is its non-Eucharistic life in a non-Eucharistic world. That's where we messed up. And I'm kind of with this British film critic who can't escape the wonder, Jonathan Miller, of this amazing thing that God went into the world, not to be of the world, but not to take us out of it either. The more you think about it, it takes your breath away. The Creator chose to enter creation. Let me put it another way. The infinite became finite. Are you kidding me? To participate in life as one of us. Emmanuel means God with us. With. That's the relationship word. With. I have a friend who says that's God's middle name. With. What a birth story. What a life story. And what a death story. It's called the incarnation story. Latin in, into. Latin carne, flesh. God in the flesh. Are you winded yet? It takes your breath away. Are you winded yet? What a story. Jesus came into this world not to leave it, but never to leave it by leaving it with God's presence through the Holy Spirit. What a story. The incarnation, then, is not a first union. It's not a first union and communion between Creator and creation. The incarnation is a new level of union and communion, a perfect level of union and communion between Creator and creation. Incarnation does more than zap earth with heaven or zip line the heavens to earth. It zips the divine into the human, the essence of the human, and zings the earth with the presence of Jesus everywhere. Incarnation means that humanity is the vessel, not the vehicle, not the divine itself, but the vessel of divinity, the organ of divinity, not divinity itself. Roman Catholic theologian at Fordham University, Elizabeth Johnson, puts it like this when she says this is what it means that God became in the flesh, incarnate. I'm quoting here from her 2018 book, Creation and the Cross, The Mercy of God for a Planet in Peril. The atoms comprising Jesus' body were once part of other creatures. You ever thought of that? The atoms comprising Jesus' body were once part of other creatures. The genetic structure of the cells in his body were kin to the flowers, the fish, the whole community of life that descended from our common ancestors. Wow. Imago Dei, created in the image of God. We, humans, imago hominum, imago Dei. The scandal of the incarnation is this. And God said, let us make the human in our image after our likeness. That's Genesis 1:26. God made humans in the divine likeness. But to keep humans in the divine likeness, God sent God to be made in the likeness of the human. That's Philippians 2:7. Made in the likeness of the humans. And that's what our problem is. Humans were made in divine likeness, but humans have returned the favor, or what is not truly a favor, because humans make the divine in human likeness. And there is our problem as we seek to be like God. Or more accurately, we seek to be God and make God into our image. Remember, God's thoughts are not our thoughts. God's ways are not our ways. And so we come to this perplexing question. What is the relationship of the absolute to the relative? Are there absolutes? Is everything just relative? What about this incarnation that came into a culture, not to be of that culture, but not to take us out of that culture either? Now, let me just say, you cannot escape absolutes. To say there are no absolutes is itself an absolute. So you can't just be a relativist, because relativism is self-defeating. In fact, after all, relative is a good word. At least most families like their relatives. And relatives are closer to us and those who are supposed to know the best. So I am both. I want you to hear me clearly and carefully here. I am both an absolutist and a relativist. I believe that one day we will want God to judge us, not on some absolute basis, but relative to our situation, relative to our context, relative to where we began. You get what I'm saying here? The Pharisees were the absolutists. Pilate was the relativist. What is truth? But I find both of them, both Pharisaism and Pilatism, within me. And so the challenge is, how do I deal with my own absolutism about some things and my own relativism about other things? And to what extent can we be both an absolutist and a relativist? So let me propose to you a triad. And we are given by Jesus this triadic relationship with culture, in, not of, but not out of it, here in John 17. And so let me blow that up a bit into a triadic relationship about truth. In absolutism, truth is timeless. In relativism, truth is timely. And then in relationalism, which brings the absolute and the relative together into relationship, truth is timeful, in the fullness of time. What brings the absolute, the constant, and the relative, change, together is the relation of this thing I call relationalism, the interaction of the absolute and the relativism. In relationalism, truth is timeful. So we have God is unchanging. Jesus is the same yesterday, today, and forever. That's absolute. But in order for Jesus to be the same yesterday, today, and forever, he's got to be fresh every morning. You got to bake fresh bread. That's relative. The absolute becomes relative to the day, relative to the culture, relative to the time. So in order for things to stay the same, absolute, they have to change, relative. I mean, you are who you are. You're the same person you were 10 years ago, but you're a whole different person you were 10 years ago, because all your cells in your body have dropped off except for your teeth, and you're a whole new person every 5 years, 5 to 7 years, depending on your gender. So there is a dance here between the absolute and the relative. And both need each other. And the essence of the incarnation is that the absolute became relative. Jesus, the absolute, became relative to a time, first century, a place, first century Palestine, a people, a Jewish people, a culture around him. I mean, we could go on, a religion. I mean, we could go on and on here. But you begin here in a relative time, for incarnation to happen, it has to enter. But then it goes from the particular to the universal. It goes from the relative to the absolute. God the Father, absolute. God the Son, Jesus the Christ, Jesus of Nazareth, relative. The absolute became relative. And God the Holy Spirit, all about relationship. Bringing the Father and the Son together and bringing the Son into relationship with each one of us. In some quarters, there's a tendency to confuse relevancy with recency. And that's why I don't really like the word relevant. I don't use it. I don't want to really be relevant. I want to be incarnate to a time and a place and a culture. So I don't like that word relevant, because some of the most relevant things are the most ancient things. It's not newness. But Jesus frees us from the imperialism of the new. And some of the relevant things most relevant things I can think of are some of the most ancient. And that's why I introduced this phrase back in the 90s, ancient future, that other people have developed, and thank God that they did. There's all too much panic over that word relative too. So I believe in absolute truth, which I believe, by the way, is Jesus the Christ, the way, the truth, the life. Notice here, though, that absolute truth is not abstract truth, but incarnate truth. God is not a principle. God is not a proposition. God is not some theory. The notion that there are no absolutes is self-contradictory. Truth is timeless, but at the same time, truth is timely. And we need truth to be timely for it to be timeless. Okay? So let me put these three together. Timeless truth became timely as the absolute became relative to a time and place. The concept of relative truth does not mean it's equally valid to choose any of the many paths to God, so long as it's meaningful to us and personally satisfying. Relativism, that kind of relativism, rots and destroys the moral basis of life. And we sense this, and even our youth today sense this. And a few years ago, Christian Smith studied teenagers and young adults, and found out that even they had a real suspicion around relativism and the idea that all religions are true. Really? Nazism is a religion. All religions depends on your personal preference. Really? I mean, Stalinism was a religion. You know, Nazism killed how many Jews and how many people? Stalinism killed. How about Maoism? That's a religion too. Oh, how many? Maybe 100 million of his own people? All religions are equal? Really? So this Jesus prayer of John 17 ends the apartheid of absolutism and relativism in Christian theology, and brings together the absolute and the relative. So I am a relative absolutist. Okay, you might call it that. I believe that absolute truth has to become incarnate in a relative way. That faith is for the living of this hour, and the Bible has reference to and relevance for the living of this hour. We may sing, "Give me that old-time religion," but we don't sing, "Return me to the good old days." I don't know many women that want to go back to the good old days, or many African Americans that want to go back to the good old days, or or any of the sick and disabled that want to live the good old days. No, we want the gospel to be fresh bread for the days that God has given us. A relative time to proclaim an absolute truth, who is the way, the truth, and the life. So just as absolute truth had to be made relative to the culture in which it was first proclaimed, Jesus in John 17 is asking for absolute truth to be made relative to our day, and in our case, to 21st century culture. Now, how do we do that? Well, the way in which we do that is we keep a focus on Christ. And he is the way through this relative, because he is the absolute sent to a relative time. That's incarnation. One of my favorite internet doctors, if you will, okay, he's known as Steve Gundry, and he's big on how you eat, and he calls it restorative medicine is what he does. But he is really worried about the spirit of people today as they're coming out of COVID and in this shell shock. And so he's giving these tips, and he's suggesting of little things that we can do to boost our moods and boost our spirits. And one he talks about is to press your yin tang right here, and just to kind of with your thumb or with your forefinger just massage it a bit. And he's got another one about box breathing, and then he's got another one about chewing gum, and then he's got another one about self-massaging with a tennis ball. Okay, I haven't tried any of those, but I do have one that I really like, and I'm going to show you and end it with this. He says, stare at a pattern. Stare at any pattern, and he says that you can reduce stress by as much as 60% just by this one thing. In other words, this one thing right here, just staring at a pattern, and just relaxing while you're staring at a pattern, works better than all these other things combined. And so I'm going to give you a pattern to stare at, and here it is. You can find this, just kind of Google Rorscach Jesus, Rorscach Jesus. A pattern, a Rorschach pattern, doesn't seem to have any kind of sense or rhyme or reason. But there are right here 4 little dots, 4 little dots. And if you stare at this pattern, these 4 little dots, and I'm going to show you how to do it, and then you stare at it without blinking as much as you can. You don't blink, you just stare, and you stare. I'm going to do it right now. I'm going to stare, and I'm going to stare. I'm staring, and I'm trying not to blink. I'm just staring. Even if you do blink, just keep staring. Come out of it and keep staring, keep staring. And then, when it starts to hurt from all the staring, now this is supposed to be soothing, but trust me, when you get to a point where you just don't feel like staring anymore, and notice how long it's taking me, just close your eyes quick and keep them closed. And as you close your eyes, you will see in the darkness the image of Christ. With your eyes closed, Jesus will pop out. And this is the pattern and the person that will lead us through whatever thorny thicket we are going through. The Christ incarnate, in the culture, not of the culture, but not out of it either. Trust Christ. See Christ in the patterns of this world. Don't come back to church so much. Oh, everybody's, how do we get people to come back to church? Well, we want them to come. Well, yes, but even more than we want them to come back to church, we want them to move forward to Jesus and where Jesus is and what he's doing as he himself becomes incarnate in this post-COVID world. So, look for Christ. See the pattern of Christ. Trust Christ, who is the way, the truth, the life. Semiotics is the art of angling, of turning things askew, upside down, inside out, cattywampus, sunny side up, over easy, scrambled, hard-boiled. We hope you enjoyed today's journey, but always remember, it's more important you prepare the preacher than you prepare the sermon.